Good evening, everyone. I am doing a totally ad hoc show. Do not expect anyone to be on at this time, so feel free to catch it later. And this show is I just got to get out of my brain, so I came down to the clinic to do a couple things. Pick up this book, which is really cool because it's got all sorts of stuff. This is printed from Google books and whatnot. Let me see here. It looks like, how's the connection? Can you text me and tell me, type below, how's the connection? How's it look? I might need to come off of Wi-Fi. That'd be helpful if whoever's watching. Anyway, so the book is all like got Mayan stuff in it and other things going on. And we have here a large video today. And it's going to probably take the better part of half an hour, so you might want to allot the time. And just to be careful, I am going to turn off the Wi-Fi because I'm just not sure I can trust the Wi-Fi. Well, let's see if that improves the connection. I don't know. It's a funny thing about using the phone to do. If the Wi-Fi connection isn't great, then you LTE. But then if LTE connection isn't great, then what are you going to do? Right, so came to pick up this book and just have a number of things. There's authentic people in terms of they're certified or they're renowned experts. I think expert is such a dangerous term that's thrown around way too much these days. I'm always reluctant when people come to my clinic and they say, well, you're the expert, and I go, oh boy. That puts me in quite a lot of expectation there. Authenticity to me is an energy wave of the person's behavior, of how they are presenting themselves. Now, certainly, if they are an authority, then we would expect them to behave with authenticity. So, for example, if they're a psychotherapist, then they should definitely not manipulate vulnerable people into sexual relationships. Right? That would not be an authentic thing to do. But I also think that you can be authentic even when you're not being exactly square or in any form of authority. Look at J.P. Sears. The man is authentically sarcastic. Now, the moment that he starts to try and exhibit some actual system of knowledge, probably people will cast aspersions or doubts on his authenticity. And that's the unfortunate thing about him setting up himself as a non-authority through his sarcasm. He's sort of projecting light onto what should be based on what it shouldn't be, or what it is. So he's making satire. As long as he remains authentic to that, I think that people will appreciate him. Well, as soon as a person is no longer authentic about something, I think that the heart can tell, no matter what. So my suggestion in general is to go through with authenticity. Now, that being said, a couple of the things I'm going to talk about tonight are going to get a little dicey, a little bit, what would you say, unpopular as far as the PC mainstream is concerned, although there's a lot of undercurrents of people who are talking about a couple of these things. I'm going to do my best to remain authentic. I'm going to say right now that, I disavow like white nationalism and any kind of putting up of one group of people over another group of people. So if I say somebody's superior to another person, what I mean is that their behavior is superior to the other person, or their line of thinking is superior. Or if they are a basketball player, their basketball skills are superior to the other person, but not because of innately who they are. And I want to say that right off the bat. That being said, we're going to talk about some things here that have to do with the suppression of basically white history. And I know this is February, but hey, I went and saw Black Panther, which I'm also going to talk about. I am all about celebrating every kind of history. It's just that the one that's on my mind right now that I have been researching a lot is the history of the Arthurs and of the Kumri. And so I kind of want to talk about those things. I want to get them out of my head. So let's talk about the King Arthur thing. If you're not familiar with the work of Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett, then you should be, because these are two men who, first of all, through their own independent work, ended up meeting each other in their own research of Welsh history. Alan Wilson happened to move into the area where Barham was, and then they just kept checking out the same books, and that's how they got together. And then through their work together, they ended up meeting Jim Michael here in Kentucky and establishing a close relationship with with Lee Pennington and Jim Michael and the Ancient Kentucky Historical Association. So that's how I'm familiar with their work. Now, these are two men who their work probably wouldn't be known outside of Britain. Certainly, the BBC did a documentary, but the academic community there attempted to crush everything they'd done. So when I learned about it, it sort of blew my mind, because the discovery of the remains and the tomb, the catacomb where King Arthur II's body was stored, and the fact that there were two King Arthurs of different time periods really blew me away. And it certainly wasn't something that it's not advertised, it's not something that enters into anyone's curriculum. But let me boil it down really quick. I'm going to do a longer show with Catherine. Now, the show tomorrow, or Monday, is all Atlantis related, so it'll be in March. But to break it down really simply, searching together, they found a series of stones. Those stones had Colburn script on them, and sometimes Algum script, and they had the histories. And when they looked at the history of Britain and how it had been twisted and convoluted for political reasons, for the Roman reasons and for Anglo-Saxon invasion reasons, the Normans, the Germans, when they looked at British history, what they decided was that the history had been distorted to suppress Welsh history, and by distorting the Welsh history, we had lost a connection to the true Arthurian legends that were recorded in the Welsh stones. And so they looked at these stones, and they read the histories on them about the Romans and when they came and where the Cymry people come from. And by following those inscriptions, they ended up finding actual archaeological sites. So now, if they had just theorized this stuff, it wouldn't be a big deal. It would be nothing. But because they actually went to these places and uncovered things and then brought them out, it became evidence. It was like self-supporting evidence. So their actions became evidence, and the evidence supported their actions and continued to provide new clues. And that's another thing. The other interesting thing is it continued to provide newer and newer clues of history that had been essentially buried for many reasons: cultural genocide, actual genocide, suppression. It's all political. It's all Northern European stuff. You know how that stuff goes. So the greater implications of this are not just that long-term, Prince Madoc and them have to leave Britain because of a catastrophe and come over to the Americas, and maybe, perhaps, allegedly, according to Jim Michael, ended up in the Kentuckiana region via the Ohio River. But there are ties for the Cymry going back to Iberia, Italy, Austria a little bit, Turkey, and all the way back to the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And that seems really extraordinary, and it seems like a great leap, especially some of the conclusions that they've come to. But bear in mind that they have supported it all along with archaeological evidence that has been published and provided to the West, the archaeologists in the West, and they've even offered to do debates, offered to do dialogues, offered to bring the material in front of conferences, and have been rebuffed, or people were perhaps afraid to challenge them. Certainly when they made the BBC documentary, there was a doctor of archaeology who said, well, they're forgeries because they aren't 6th century writing. So they told BBC where more stones were. They went and compared them. It looked the same. Well, this man hadn't even seen what the Arturius Rex stone looked like. He had just carte blanche said that they were forgeries, because how could they be anything else? it's quite an assumption of logic to say that it couldn't be because it doesn't fit your paradigm. That is not a logical conclusion. It is actually quite an unscientific conclusion, and it was clearly made to devalue the findings. Later on, that man ended up going the opposite direction and saying the stone was authentic, but it was never followed up in the mainstream. So how does that relate to the next thing that I want to talk about? I want to talk about authorities, and especially the conspiracies to cover history. Because in the Family Alchemy series, we talked about how you have to uncover your past. And I feel that the conspiracy to cover history, first of all, of course, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So a conspiracy is just when a couple of people, and perhaps even a group of people, agree to do something. Usually money, power, or politics of some kind are involved. However, it doesn't have to be as big as the Illuminati. It can just be a couple of academics who implicitly, emotionally agree with each other, and they abuse their authority, whether it's through the peer review process or any other process, to suppress history and keep it from reaching the masses. As long as they are the gatekeepers, they can do that without any problem. That isn't a conspiracy theory, that's a conspiracy fact. That is the thing that has happened from, before Galileo, but certainly at the time of Galileo, all the way through the 20th century and even to now. It's getting harder now because the internet gives people access to actual research documents, and people will go and download those documents, whether it's from academia.edu or anywhere else, and they will go and check. And the time of authority, of appealing to just common sense and just saying something with authority, is kind of ending. So, for example, a woman came into my clinic and she said that she didn't want to live in Paducah, Kentucky, because it had the same crime rate as Chicago. So I can actually do a search here. I can open up Wolfram Alpha. Okay, if you don't know about Wolfram Alpha, it's a computational engine, and I can say homicide rate Paducah, Kentucky. Let's see if it comes up with a number here. Let's see if it comes up. So Wolfram Alpha searches for searches databases, known databases. So yeah, so it came up with 4 crimes per year. So I can actually say that versus homicide rate Chicago, Illinois. Right, so right there, Paducah, 4 crimes per 100,000 people. Chicago, Illinois, 17.52. So she was clearly talking. Now, I could have said to her, I don't believe you for a minute. That wouldn't be appropriate in the clinic. But it was something that is like obvious to me that she was way off in some of her basis. Now, when I look at the graph here, there were a couple spikes in Paducah's crime rates. Certainly there were, what year is that? That's probably like 2005, 2004. There was some kind of spike, and it looks like it's up higher than Chicago, but on average, there's no comparison. So the internet gives us the power to go and check what the person is saying. Authority is no longer conferred to a matter of confidence. You can do the research. You can go and look for yourself. And if somebody claims the earth is flat, you can go and look at the reasons why we know it isn't. You don't have to rely on the fact that you want that person to like you, or the fact that you like them, or that they have a twinkle in their eye, or if you don't believe them, just the fact that you don't like them, that you don't agree with them. You can exit the gift shop. You can exit all the echo chambers and challenge your confirmation biases and go and look for things yourself. If you don't believe me about the King Arthur II, that's fine. I don't mind if the viewer doesn't believe that there were 2 King Arthurs and that the second one was the one who defeated the Saxons and then had to leave Britain because of a disaster and go to America and ended up in Kentucky You know, I could just be biased for Kentucky, right? Although Kentucky has a lot of historical things about it. Many people do not know that we have a culture that was centered in the Ohio River Valley area called the Adena Hopewell, which are really called the Allegui, that is more mysterious to us than the Mayans. We literally know more about the Mayans and the Aztec and the Egyptians than we know about the Allegui people. And that's not a hyperbole. That is a literal truth. So there is a lot of history that goes on here. However, that's not evidence. So the fact that the mounds look exactly the same as the kind that were in Wales is not evidence. It's an interesting correlation. But these men, Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett, went and actually found stones with writing on them that said, and they had the family histories, they had the places of the battles, the actual battles, the years of those battles, who led those battles, and you can find this work compiled in not only the Arturius Rex found book, which is kind of expensive, you probably have to get the PDF, but also in the Holy Kingdom book, which is an Adrian Gilbert book. And he worked with Robert Bauval on the pyramid, what was that, the Orion Mysteries or the Orion Code, something like that. So when we go to look at this conspiracy to hold or withhold information, it is not only confined to Black history, Native American history, Indian history, Asian history, although for the most part, the Chinese history is not really that suppressed, to be honest with you. It's badly interpreted in many places, but many people are interested in Chinese history. But all these other histories often are suppressed, and so are white histories. This is the thing that I need people to understand, that there are things that have been made up about white history, such as the Celtics, the Celts, and the origins of Israel, even modern, like who is actually, the Semites? Who are they? Where are they from? The entire idea that Aryans invaded India. It's just all over the place. Even in so much as that the Greeks originated everything and that the Romans borrowed everything from Greece is not necessarily true. There are many things that were Roman innovations and that they came up together, and certainly probably true that they didn't even invent most of those things. I mean, a lot of it came from Samaria. So the conspiracy to cover history and also of to twist science is not all to support white supremacy. White supremacists are racists who are out there who are shallow-minded people. They're not interested in this kind of history detail. They're only interested in furthering a racial divide that is supported by the identitarians on the other side. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But if you have, go look on your computer right now. Go to Wikipedia, look up Black Pride, and then look up White Pride. You see that Black Pride is all these positive elements, and I agree. Whether it's Black Pride, Gay Pride, whatever. But when you look at White Pride, it's all negative elements. It's all things that you shouldn't ask, like you shouldn't believe. You shouldn't be supportive of your own racial paradigm or your own cultural history. And when you get down to the bottom of it, it's not just denying the history that is recent, like the 20th century history, the good things. It's also undermining the origins of many peoples who just happen to not be perhaps associated with the Catholic Church or perhaps associated with the Roman Empire. And this has happened to Europeans all over the place. Now, I'm not saying that white people have suffered nearly as much in America as African Americans. Absolutely. There's no question African Americans have suffered as much. But what I am saying is that people suffer because they don't have a connection to the past. And that can be anywhere. That could be in America. It could be in Appalachia, where drugs are rampant. And it can be also in India. It can be in Eastern Europe. Anywhere that war and conspiracy of power, authority, to break apart and break down the history of people and create this growing amnesia will cause suffering, because the root of suffering is ignorance. The root of suffering is ignorance. Now, if you transform ignorance into life experience, then you get wisdom. So wisdom is the antidote, right? All right, so the wider implication of these societal lies is that you have to step back and go, can I trust any of this stuff? You know, is it good? Is any of this good for me? And as much as I enjoy certain things, sometimes they're not good for you. So take, for example, here, I enjoyed the Black Panther. I thought it was a really fun film. There was a few things in there that I understood who the audience was for. I'm a big enough man. I can enjoy that. I had a lot of fun. I was sitting next to my African-American friend. We had a good time. But when you look at it versus Thor Ragnarok is a film with large implicit anti-male sentiment. And there's a huge difference between the two characters in terms of what they're allowed to achieve. Black Panther, we barely know him as far as the MCU is concerned, and almost immediately he's acquiring his kingship. Whereas with Thor, he's not allowed. Not only that, he's the destruction of his own homeland. He is the cause of the end of his people. And although he is a good king in terms of he saves his people, because Asgard is the people. Spoiler alert, by the way. The fact that they never even crown him as king, and they never give a moment, even when given a chance with Odin being there to say, you are now the king, it's not allowed. This is part of a growing agenda of SJWs and leftists, right? I'm not going to say liberals, I'm going to say leftists, who are, social, cultural Marxists, to undermine the ability of many people to have a right to express who they are. And it's not only white people or straight white males, such as myself, that are being undermined. It is also the minorities. And when you go to the channels of some black conservatives, and you subscribe to them, whether it's Candace Owens or Amazing Lucas or some black guy, and you listen to what they are seeing it too. They are seeing a system, an identitarian politics that is designed to make one group of people always the strong and always the enemy, and divide and say this other group is not as savvy, not as clever, not as educated, and therefore the first group has to give up everything. Now, for me, I don't want anybody to be poor. I want everybody to have more. I want everybody to have more power. I want everybody to have more empowerment, right, inside them, and to have plenty of wealth to get around to everything. I certainly was not always wealthy in my life, and if I have privilege, then I try to use it for the right reasons. But I think that the entire paradigm of privilege is it's almost like it was created by the same kind of people that would suppress the Welsh history in order to prop up Anglo-Saxon history. It's the same kind of mentality, and it's all to keep people who aren't having power in the moment from attaining it, and also to basically undermine the human narrative, because the human narrative, of course, is one of unity, is one of us all coming together and getting to somewhere. It goes back to the authenticity, right? Authentic history is a threat to people in power. And that's how I am looking at things these days in terms of what do I believe. It is more likely for me to see it as authentic if it threatens the system. If it threatens the system, I automatically start thinking, there must be something about it that is against it's against the paradigm of keeping people separated from each other and putting them at odds. Because when I see that, I see Rwanda. I see, Hutus and Tutsis killing each other, even though they've existed together for thousands of years. I see colonialism of the mind. And colonialism of the mind, to me, is the greatest injustice. So, when I look at the social justice warrior lie, it's not just about the cultural Marxism and how, communism, we've never tried it, we have. That's what it does. It gets millions of people killed. The lie is that it supports anyone. It doesn't. It does enable mob rule. So if you like mobs, if you like how, for example, a union might come in and ruin an entire industry of shipbuilding or something by, the mix of violence and attacking. If you like mob rule, then the SJW paradigm does work for you, but it doesn't necessarily make you powerful inside. That's my concern about the entire SJW movement, is that it doesn't create empowerment of the individual. And I know that's what they believe. It should be a group thing, group justice. But I do not think it empowers the group either. I don't think it empowers the majority or the minority. And that's what I want to illustrate when I talked about authenticity, and then I went on to the King Arthur stuff. And if you're just joining, you probably will want to see the beginning from the video for all that to make sense. So I think identitarian politics is very dangerous. I think that yin-yang, if you have one side created, you're going to create the other side automatically. And when you look at people like Richard Spencer, they say, I'm identitarian, just like the SJWs. And they need each other, and they support each other, and it becomes an entire revolving, toxic mechanism that sweeps everyone into a divisive mindset. And yet doesn't lead them, it makes them question some kind of system, but not questioning enough to go and read history, not questioning enough to go and look at what, mainstream archaeology, mainstream Egyptology have come away with saying about our human history. Because ultimately, the cataclysms that I talk about, whether it's on my channel or on Catherine's channel, these happen to everyone. They happened all over. The Exodus events are written in Exodus. They're good, but they're also in the Apu or Papyrus, and they're on the Edfu pyramid texts. These events happened all over the place. They happened to the Mayans. I was reading, again, I bring this book up, I was reading in here, at one time, the Mayans, with their brilliant calendar, there was only 260 days in a year. And they were talking, the archaeologists, this book is written like 1882, and archaeologists are talking about how impossible it is that the sun would be coming up in the west and going to the east, and that the south couldn't be the north. So these events happened worldwide, and the desire of small groups of interested parties to pull us apart, that conspiracy to me is inauthentic. And I do not confer any authority to anyone who supports that, whether they have a PhD or don't. I believe that we all have a right to life. If we are going to become Junrin, or authentic people, complete people is another way of translating that. I believe we need to support the right to life and also the freedom. And that includes freedom to react strongly to things. Even if you disagree, there's no problem with that. Actually, maybe you should. Maybe you should say it even very aggressively, so long as you don't violate the clear and present danger principle, which is if there's a clear and present danger, then no longer is it a right. It's now violating someone else's rights, and you lose that right. And I believe that's an important thing to support in this day and age. And I hope you do too. I won't get too much more political as far as that goes, but the middle edge of things, between the yin and yang, is where I think we will find the authenticity. And then true authority will come from the authenticity, because false authority certainly comes from a whole lot of people with useless degrees running around telling everybody how they should behave, how they should think, how they should talk. Instead, why don't we have authority come from the authenticity? If the authenticity is the right energy wave, then the authority seems to me that it will be supplied by the listener. And if it isn't, and maybe that's utopian sounding, but I do feel it's closer towards naturalism. And if we are going to make it through, there's a principle in dream building that, you can build a dream, but the longer you go, the more you're kind of borrowing from your destiny. And at some point, nature kind of calls you for it. I feel like the big difference between our civilized societies and tribal societies is that tribal societies tried some of that, and then they said, let's go back to nature. And our society's the one that kept going. You know what? The Sumerians almost had it. If we just keep going, we're going to figure out how to technologically solve our way out of this. Nature's not agreeing with us right now. And we've got to move back towards naturalism. I'm not saying we have to get rid of our humanistic ethics and go back to the age of scalping and human sacrifice. But I do believe that we need to be able to have authentic discussion without it devolving into violence, and yet be able to be aggressive, be able to be authoritarian or an authority in our presentation of our belief, and not be threatened by a group identity that you can't exist because you are wrong, and so we are going to get rid of you. I don't know why there was in ancient societies a lot of human sacrifice, as far as like the philosophy or the mentality that led to it. I know that there's a couple things. One is blood was considered magical. Two is that the god of war destroyed a lot of things, and so it was to appease the gods. Whether it was Mars or Venus, in various times there was a lot of destruction. And three, human life was thought of as part of a longer cycle. Even in the Bible there are references to reincarnation. So it wasn't like there wasn't as much attachment to a single life back then as there is now. And so you're part of a greater spirit world, and good or bad, you decide. I am at the end of my list of topics, and remember what I said, what I feel about authenticity, about authority. You decide for yourself. Do you think that I'm being authentic in sharing my opinions about suppression of history, everyone's history, including white people's history? And am I being a good authority? If not, feel free to comment below. Let me know. And if you feel yes, then share around these ideas. Think about them deeply and get back to me and let me know. Guys, I really appreciate it, and you all have a blessed rest of your weekend.